Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm very, very happy that you all made it. And I just wanted to say that it's very moving this afternoon to have local colleagues who are here with us and IKT members and guests who came from, I think I counted about 20 to 22 different countries in the world, and this is very, very exciting. And I think it's a very special moment that we're all reconvening here today together as a professional community to explore curatorial ideas, knowledge, and inspiration, which is always super important. The Congress, for those of you who are colleagues from here, you probably heard it is the symposium is part of the IKT Congress 2012, which is held for the first time in Israel. It's IKT is a curatorial association of curators of contemporary art, and each year they hold a congress in a different part of the world. And about 3 years ago, I proposed that we hold it in Israel, and it took a few years, and here we are together at the museum. I want to really thank all of those that supported this entire project and that have been following and with me in the past few years and that made this Congress happen. To all the supporters, Rivka Secker, from the founder of Artiz, Hila Oren, the director of Tel Aviv Global City, Tel Aviv Art Year 2012, Idita Michai, the director of the art department at the Ministry of Culture, Eyal Shel from the Jerusalem Foundation, Vered Gadish, the director of Outset Israel, who's also supporting the symposium today, Gil Brandes, the founder of Art Partners. A special thank you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to Rafi Gamzu, and to Yossi Balt, who helped host a lot of our colleagues from abroad. And I'd like to extend my deep gratitude and appreciation to James Snyder, the director of the Israel Museum, and Susan Landau for hosting the symposium. To Eyal Danon and Nir Sagiv from the Israeli Center for Digital Art that also collaborated with me on this project. To my wonderful staff, my assistant Yael Klein, who's sitting over there, Dana Klein, who helped produce everything, she's up there, they're not sisters, Yael Nir, Noah Reshef, and Adi Goldner, who are chaperoning all of us throughout all these days. And a special thank you also to Friedemann Malsch, the president of IKT, who's over here, and Johanna Schindler, who have been working close with me to make this happen. So I will now pass the word over to Stephen Foster, the curator and director of the John Hansard Gallery from the University of Southampton, UK, who developed the topic for this symposium, Curating the New Politics, and we are very excited to hear about it. Thank you, and thanks for coming.
We've called the title of this symposium Curating the New Politics, so the initial questions to ask are, what's the new politics and what is there to curate about it? And in the brief that I sent out originally, which was pasted on the website, I'd used the rather pretentious expression post-globalization. Globalization, of course, is something that's been an ongoing process for hundreds or thousands of years. And really I was referring to the recent period of digitization. Because the process of globalization has increased exponentially through digitization. The initial period of that was created by the internet, as we all know, and other similar means. And really, whilst it gave the impression of increasing democracy substantially, it also increased governments and multinational business to have a greater control over us. I think what's happened in the most recent years, and it's in this sense that I use the term new politics, has been an increasing democratization as a result of viral communication systems, Facebook and social networking and so on. And what's really interesting that whilst it gives, if you look at the antics of Facebook currently, it gives multinational companies and countries even greater control over us, but they also increase democratization. And these viral systems of communicating have allowed things like the Arab Spring, the processes for democracy, the anti-capitalist movement to happen internationally through viral means. This has been a very interesting development. I think it will have a great impact on the future. So what implications does this have for curatorship? Well, I think really, first of all, I think the digital media are increasingly used as forms of art, and their distribution is much greater. It creates a system of narrowcasting internationally rather than broadcasting to a regional audience, like a blunderbuss, which, for instance, the BBC has been in England for a long time. Narrowcasting, just to give you one example, to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, there's a philosophy website called Philosophy Bites, in which two contemporary philosophers discuss an issue of the day. It would have an audience, perhaps, in London, this thing would have an audience of perhaps 100 people. In Southampton, it might have an audience of 20. It actually narrowcasts to signed up members worldwide and speaks to 1 million. There's a specialist discussion, but it reaches a very, very large audience internationally. So the mixture of digital media and their distribution makes the big difference, I think. So this is the background, the context in which I think today's debate is going to take place. We're going to have 4 speakers who come from a range of interesting backgrounds. I'll tell you about them as we go along, but the first speaker is Jonathan Harris, and then Utameta Bauer, and then Ayal Danon, and then Tanya Bruguera. And to begin with, Jonathan Harris, I've searched a long way to find our first speaker. He's also from the University of Southampton at Winchester School of Art, but he's taught in many universities in Britain, at Leeds, Kiel, Liverpool, London and Edinburgh, before becoming the global art and design professor of global art and design at Winchester School of Art. He's the author of or editor of 16 books, and the most recent book is a book called Globalization and Contemporary Art. So he's going to, in his presentation, analyze the nature of globalization and talk through a number of examples this history. So Jonathan, over to you.
Let's briefly consider the terms globalization and globalism. The former term, globalization, has usually been seen or presented as an objective historical process with certain consequences, products, and effects. Setting aside thorny issues such as deciding when globalization started, or defining its phases and stages, or explaining its relations to other claimed objective historical processes, such as the formation of the nation-state system in the 19th century, and the related but in some ways countervailing process of internationalization, associated with organizations such as the 1919 League of Nations and the 1945 United Nations. Can you hear me properly? It sounds like it's going up and down a bit. Globalism, in contrast, is a term that I have turned to recently in my own research and writing in order to restore and emphasize the sense of subjective, willed and idealistic actions undertaken by individuals and groups intended to bring together peoples and communities within a worldwide, singular and global collectivity. Now, what I call utopian globalism, in the form of independent avant-garde artists' support for world social and spiritual revolution, is the focus of a new book that I've written due this fall, within which I trace some of the key visual art within this lineage in the 20th century. From Tatlin's 1919 utopian communist model for a monument to the Third International, to Christo's wrapped structures, and then a bit beyond. I shall return to Christo in a moment. Of course, the character and import of his works are at a considerable distance politically, philosophically, and in formal and physical terms from Tatlin's. But it's clear, nevertheless, that the two ideas and terms, that's globalization and globalism, are interconnected. However much we might feel or be taught that globalization has been simply done to us or done by them, in terms, say, of corporations shifting production to third world countries in order to make bigger profits by lowering labor costs, or Chinese imports flooding our markets with cheap and poor imitations of Western products, or the emergence of an anodyne global art style based on homogenized transcultural commodifiable signs and symbols available within the cycle of biennales. Nevertheless, there are, I think, designs and intentions at work in this objective globalization process, while the ideas, values, and visualizations of global actors of all kinds, the globalists, have and do also produce material effects and consequences in the world. For the duration of this talk, then, please consider the term globalization to refer to both the material and the ideal, the institution and the creative agent, the objective and the subjective. Globalization and its relation to contemporary art can be mapped conceptually, I've argued, in 7 interrelated systemic ways. And I've set these out via discussion in 33 empirical essays written by contributors from around the world in the anthology Globalization and Contemporary Art published last year. Remember too, however, that the discourse and entity of contemporary art is also, in a way, an invention and intention of globalization processes, however much it might seem or appear to represent itself as merely a neutral or factual item. So I've argued that a prismatic or alternating analytic understanding is required, because the problem of globalization and contemporary art is the problem of a set of interacting material and conceptual systems and forces, pressures and intentions, forms and meanings operating throughout the world now. Entities including artworks, museums and galleries, nation states like Israel and the UK, artists and curators and critics form part of this systemic, discursive, material network. There is also, as I think we all know here, I suspect, an important conceptual feedback loop mechanism within this system. Our actions in and on the world and our ideas about globalization enter into our work within, on behalf of now globalized, but still globalizing institutions, such as Winchester School of Art, Tate, IKT, or the Israel Museum. These, and all of us here, are players in the system. In global terms, corporate powers such as Tate and Guggenheim, Sotheby's and Christie's dominate much institutional and market-based activity in the world art system. However much an authentically heterogeneous field of activities really does exist globally, in terms of artists and curators, for instance, in many places synthesizing local and imported or contemporary and traditional elements in their artworks and exhibitions. The fact that such a global and globalizing system exists is reflected in the general recognition now that all these apparently familiar notions, local, contemporary, traditional, as well as the terms art and artists themselves, of course, are required now to be held in severe inverted commas, understood as ideas and presuppositions constantly in need of radical question and revision, as deeper processes of interaction between art world institutions, formations, modes of production, modes or forms of art production, critical discursive forms, and in relation to broader systemic, social, and reproductive organizational forms exist, such as multinational corporations, nation states, and modes of production and consumption patterns in their art world-specific forms. Now, there simply is no neutral language to describe this systemic reality, and the idea or desire to appear neutral seems an increasingly suspicious one. Nevertheless, I have tried to coin analytic terms but don't immediately, I hope, reinforce the historic and cultural dominance of Western European and US power in the world. Hence, for example, I suggest the abstract term producer rather than artist, or mode rather than style. Now, I understand that using these abstract terms doesn't solve many problems to do with the geopolitical operation and emanation of power and interests, and that such new terms can create problems of their own. But this discussion, or put more strongly, conflict between protagonists, should now be the core purpose, I believe, of responsible curatorial activity and outreach learning, and critical debate and historical review, especially in this place, one might observe. Whatever the future will be, as Michael Hart and Tony Negri argued in their book Empire, there can be no turning back from globalization. Whatever desired future might be achieved, or simply fought over to mutual ruin, here on the ground in Israel-Palestine or beyond, it will come about only within and through further acts and processes of globalization, not by rejection or avoidance of them. The wider continuing Middle East uprisings are an inevitable component of this future too, in political and cultural terms. And whatever the local specificities of this ground, it exists within the wider globalized world, which remains partly the historical effect or legacy of mid to late 20th century Cold War territorial and ideological struggles. And this struggle was itself an outcome of the Second World War, of the attempt by the Nazis to exterminate the Jews, and the longer historical contest between communism, utopian or scientific, Soviet or countercultural, and the Western capitalist democracies, traceable back to our comrade artist Tatlin and his fellow Bolsheviks, and earlier. So, inside or outside the gallery and museum, studio or post-studio, in productive and consumption modes, artists and curators, sometimes artists as curators, curators as artists, have to deal with this knowledge and extend it, or be held culpable if their ignorance or avoidance of it idealizes and misrepresents the place and function now of art, artists, curators, and critics within the global and globalizing world. Consider the following parable, which is in itself globalist. And think of globalism, however ambiguous this term might still seem to you, in the way you might understand the terms communism or Zionism. In the early 1950s, the artist Christo earned credits for part of his art training at the Fine Art Academy in the then socialist Bulgaria by working on agit propaganda projects in the countryside. Quote, "The only Western thing that passed through Bulgaria," he explained, "was the famous Orient Express, where travelers can see the landscape in Bulgaria. The students of the visual art department were going to the cooperative farms and giving advice to the farmers, how they should park their combines and tractors around the railway tracks so that everyone on the trains would see that there was a lot of activity there, how to stack the hay, not behind the hill but on the top, around the railroad track," unquote. One of Christo's first outdoor projects was inspired by the sheer visibility and visual character of that other vivid site marking and site mapping divider, the Berlin Wall. Christo's 1962 Iron Curtain, wall of oil barrels, was erected following the granting of official permission in a small street in Paris, the Rue Visconti. Now, how to read simply, though it's hard to read simply one way or another, this creation, the practical temporary division of a street, both roughly imitated and yet might be thought to have offered a critique of the Berlin Wall itself, though the meaning of the action in blocking the Paris street for a number of hours resists any simple or singular reading. But it is safe to say that Christo's Iron Curtain drew attention to, focused attention upon an act and situation elsewhere, the construction and maintenance of the Berlin Wall, which had produced extremely powerful practical, ideological, social and emotive effects within that city, divided Germany, Western Europe, including Paris and France, and in the Cold War world beyond. Iron Curtain worked through a distancing device which both literally distanced by physically dividing the street in Paris and drew attention to the action of the Berlin Wall metaphorically, using its different formal materials poetically via a Verfremdung effect, or making strange device. Joseph Beuys's 1964 action, Raising the Berlin Wall, attempted something similar 2 years later, with the artist, who is another of my utopian globalists, claiming that his high-profile suggestion to raise the height of the wall offered what he called an aesthetic solution to the problem of the wall, proffering, quote, an image that might take the edge off the wall, destroy the wall, unquote. Beuys made this statement in Aachen, West Germany, location of the unsuccessful 1944 July plot, an attempt by Wehrmacht officers to kill Hitler, in which he called for the raising of the height of the recently erected Berlin Wall by 5 centimetres. This gesture-stroke joke was intended and duly received as an absurd and provocative incitement. It formed part of an event organised by the Fluxus network of artists and performers, marking the failed assassination attempt. The action ended in chaos when enraged students invaded the stage area and the artist was punched in the face. Wrapped Reichstag, 1995, built on Christo's Iron Curtain. It constituted an extended durational project whose origins, when traced back to the postcard image of the building he'd received in 1971, followed less than a decade from the artist's initial response to the construction of the Berlin Wall itself. Christo's own disorienting passage from east to west, the start to his artistic nomadism, was bound up with the project from these beginnings. Now consider the sequence of lenticular panels which make up the walls of the maze-like structure that is the installation British-Israeli-Palestinian artist Bashir Makul created in his work Enter Ghost, Exit Ghost, exhibited at the Yang Gallery at the 798 District in Beijing, China in March-April 2012. Though we continue to know that we remain in an installation, in a gallery, as we move through this installation, these panels, projecting a series of alternating photographic images of occupied Palestinian towns as we walk past them, exhibit images that appear, then disappear, and sometimes seem eerily to coexist in our perception of them. Now, it's hard to see the lenticular effect from these still photographs. However, Enter Ghost, Exit Ghost may travel to Jaffa later this year. Because the images change as we move past each panel, we become highly aware that perception and acts of consciousness and self-consciousness sequentially related to these perceptions are inseparable from our own physical and bodily disposition. The term lenticular has its origins in late Middle English usage, referring to a lens-like shape. The root of this term lens lies in the Latin for lentil, a small rounded seed cultivated for food in Mediterranean countries. A lens was a transparent substance, such as a piece of glass, with one or more surfaces curved or otherwise shaped to cause regular convergence or divergence of light passing through it. Seeing images mutate in Enter Ghost, Exit Ghost as we move through the maze, correcting or confirming our hypotheses of where we think we are, or have been, or want to be, is constantly a matter of changing perspective, whether to turn left or right, but left or right in relation to what fixed or achieved or achievable position, whether to turn or to return, or to hold this position? Would a roadmap perhaps help with the direction we want to go in? So we enter here the geometry of radical doubt. The ghost of an image suggests we have returned unwittingly to a position we have occupied before, with no real sense of a way forward. The route is obscured, the light bad, although the lenticular panels project more images, more ghosts of a past, present, or even future moment in movement. The model of a maze that is enter ghost, exit ghost stands some comparison with the architecture of checkpoints and border crossings that both link together and divide Israel and the Palestinian Authority territories. The shift in focus and thinking makes sense because the shifting photographic images in Makul's artwork depict past and present moments in the cities and towns of the Palestinian Authority and in the State of Israel. They represent the presence within these imbricated territories of another people, the Palestinians, whose images and symbols are also now a matter of ellipses, shifting shapes, places, meanings, peoples, and plans. The crossing between Jerusalem and Ramallah in the West Bank, for instance, this particular maze operates 5 stages in the circulation of its temporary occupants. These channels link iron turnstiles, X-ray gates, more turnstiles, inspection booths, and X-ray machines for bags. Palestinians negotiating this structure are hailed by the guards and other security personnel by a loudspeaker and move through its locks controlled by remote control gates. The glass panels enabling surveillance and operation of the crossings are so thick that they prevent the Palestinians seeing the humans responsible for their transit through or detention in it. The architecture of this structure instructively embodies the hieratic architecture of visibilities and invisibilities that the Israeli state has created, maintains and refines in its dealing with the Palestinians. Enter ghost, exit ghost is both a mediation and a meditation upon and a simulation of this structure or logic of the visible in Israel and its connections to power and Palestine. Looking, seeing, and representing are interactive processes in legal, political, and artistic practices. Enter ghost, exit ghost as an artifact itself articulates all these processes through its serial lenticular imagery and its maze of paths leading to the seeming opacities of the cardboard city at its termination. What can be seen or not seen is dependent on where you are, but also on who you are and how your own perspective has been formed. Now, there are many antecedent works in art history. John Constable, the English landscape painter, depicted the working people of East Anglia as only marginally visible in his great paintings of Suffolk. Their represented size, such as the mother nursing a baby in the foreground in Dedham Vale, 1828, reflected his sense of their background relative insignificance, socially and politically, within the countryside that he both loved and owned. Visibility, then, is a part synonym for the notion of transparency, the clarity associated with candor or truthfulness in social and democratic political life. For instance, the glass cupola built above and into the debating chamber of the Reichstag building in Berlin after it once again became the seat of the unified German parliament after 1994, was designed literally to embody and metaphorically to figure this supposed transparency necessary to and characteristic of democratic discourse, as if democracy could or should actually be seen to be happening. In alluding to these realities in Israel, Palestinian Authority areas and the occupied territories, Enter Ghost, Exit Ghost thus turns its lenticular pictures into windows of a kind. These throw light on the state and the land, and on Israel's seemingly coherent image of selfhood, position and place. On the one hand, this ideological edifice has depended on its persistently changing depiction of its outside, that which lies beyond and against it. These entities have been both alien enemy lands and states, for instance the Suez Canal Zone, and Egypt to the west in 1973. The Bar-Lev line, or wall of sand, had been intended to act as a physical and visual barrier against the Egyptian army, designed to limit the enemy's vision and actions with both tactical and ideological meanings. But when the Egyptians crossed the canal and blasted through a part of the line using high-pressure water cannons, the incursion was read as a significant defeat for the idea of Israel being limited by demarcated physical boundaries, potentially vulnerable to penetration. Instead, and on the other hand, Israel would become a matter and a heterogeneous material of depth, subject to comprehensive internal disciplinary controls and strategically unfixed borders. Imagine the construction of the Bar-Lev line and its effective demolition during the 1973 war then as a kind of political military Cold War corollary to Michael Heiser's double negative, land art deconstruction from 1970. Heiser's southeastern Nevada desert Mesa location is exchanged for the Sinai Peninsula. Themes of industrial land exploitation and reclamation exchanged for state territorial advantage and identity, and the will and conception of artists replaced by the will of military rulers in the prosecution of nation-state building. Enter Ghost, Exit Ghosts, Maze of Walls and Channels, 40 years on from Heiser's singular passage cut through the Mesa rock, works critically to re-aestheticize the architecture of the Israeli state, as Christo and Beuys did in their work on West Germany in the Cold War, turning the mundane, concrete realities of its own forms of domination through checkpoints and separation fences back into a questioning metaphor. Maya Ying Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial, erected in Washington, D.C. in 1982, turned the rhetoric of visibility in another direction. Consisting of a long, rising black marble wall containing the names of all the American soldiers killed in that conflict, this structure actually throws back at the viewer only the visibility of their own image looking at the wall, as much as they simultaneously trace the names of their loved ones carved in the stone in front of them. This wall functions as a kind of anti-memorial to a war of invasion and occupation that was lost in 1975, and against which a majority in the USA eventually emerged. Enter Ghost, Exit Ghost, though focused on Israel and the Palestinians, actually connects to this longer and broader history of regional and global conflict, within which the Cold War and the hot Vietnam War are both implicated. In the West Bank, where Israeli settlements and road systems function effectively as barriers, dividing as well as swallowing up Palestinian populations, a new totality of temporal spatial relations above and below, as well as on the ground, has emerged. Now, in effect, this is nothing more or less than a local expression and form of globalization. Guy Debord, author of the 1967 Society of the Spectacle, noted, quote, "All time and space become foreign to people. The spectacle is the map of this new world, a map that is identical to the territory it represents." Though the situation in Israel offers a clear case of how power and division are productive as well as destructive in material and socio-political terms, the example is only one of many within globalization since 1945. The Lines of Control exhibition recently toured in the US, and an ongoing project organised by the Green Kahneman Arts Organisation based in London presented works by 33 artists concerned with the division of territories and the productive operation of borders. Works in the show consider the 1947 division of India that created Pakistan and later Bangladesh, North and South Korea, Sudan and South Sudan, Ireland and Northern Ireland, Armenia and its diaspora, as well as Israel and Palestine. Bloodlines, a 1997 collaborative project created by the Mumbai-based artist Milani and the then Karachi-based artist Dadi, might be the first artwork co-produced by an Indian and a Pakistani. The work represents the red Radcliffe line that divided their former homes and families. Across 16 panels, the artists used thousands of gold, blue and crimson sequins to model the 1947 border that produced the states of India and West and East Pakistan. India is in the middle. The work was made by professional embroiderers in Karachi who used the zari, traditional metal-wrapped threads used to embellish Indian and Pakistani garments. The border was the work of the British Radcliffe Boundary Commission, appointed to demarcate the partition and led by Sir Cyril Radcliffe, who had been given only 5 weeks to complete the job and had never even visited India or had any idea of its complexities. In conclusion, let's focus less on the dismally central role of the British in creating this and other global territorial disasters nearer to home, and more on the idea and possibility of future cooperation in dealing with their consequences on the literal as well as metaphorical ground. Curators and critics, as well as artists, can and ought to play a positive role in that project, a work of hopefully practical as well as utopian globalism. Thank you.
The next speaker is Uta Mehta. She's an associate professor at MIT School of Architecture and Planning, where she's been the founding director of the Program of Art, Culture and Technology and director of Visual Arts. She was recently appointed, she starts next semester, as the Dean of Fine Arts at the Royal College of Art in London. Previously, she'd been professor and head of the Institute of Contemporary Art at the Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna, and she studied stage design and art at in Hamburg. And for more than 2 decades worked as a curator of exhibitions and presentations on film and other things. She was a co-curator of Documenta 11 on the team of Okwe and Wezo, the artistic director of the 3rd Berlin Biennale, and served as the founding director of the Office for Contemporary Art Norway. She is going to make a presentation entitled Curate the Future, Not the Walls. Uta.
Yeah, thank you all very much. And thank you so much for the presentation. And I just want to say, like, if people are knocked out because we had a very long day, please take a power nap, because I think the program will still be very challenging until we leave. I won't be offended. I'm like tired too, because it was really amazing what we have seen so far, and the program had been very tight. And I also want to thank all the people working on that who have been very patient with our ups and downs, because sometimes it's really a little challenging to go through everything. But I also want to thank IKT's board for inviting me and having me back. I'm actually since 22 years a member, but the last years I have to say I calmed a little bit down in terms of curating and was much more working locally. And so I was a little surprised when the invitation came by Stephen, and I said, I don't know exactly what I even should talk about, because I'm not curating anymore in a classical sense. It's much more, as it was just mentioned, it's much more talking about modes of production and how can that be implemented also when we are teaching in university. So how can we bridge basically between teaching and also already being active producers, and also bringing our students kind of out in the field to not stay just on theory. That might be also surprising, because I was heading 10 years Department of Theory at Academy of Fine Arts Vienna. So it's always like the kind of deschooling always counts also for ourselves. So I also, as I said, I want to thank the IKT board, Stephen Foster, and also Outset for the invitation to join this symposium. But I also would like to thank Dana Heller and her team to get this very insightful program lined up, and also Johanna Schindler for her support in getting us here. And I think it's producing such symposia before and like such events also for IKT. I know the challenge and the ups and downs, so really thank you so much, and you should deserve a really extra applause. It's It is my first time in Israel, and I'm certain in sharing this with other IKT members who came from abroad that this visit will provide us with a different understanding of this highly complex and challenging topography we actually might leave with more questions than answers, and that is not a bad thing. The title of the symposium is an interesting one. How can we curate politics, and even more so, should we? And what is this new politics anyway? The title of the symposium is an interesting one. How can we curate politics? Oh, sorry. And how can we do that anyway? But I hope I jump over. And it's really interesting as the Berlin Biennial just opened, and the press already is very interesting. So just to translate for you, it says like as they gave one floor to Occupy, the Occupy movement, the 7th Berlin Biennial art with an anarcho image, or another one says Polish curator lights a fire on the Berlin art scene, and it's dealing also with Artur Mierzymski's notion of much more having a direct action again than staging artwork in a kind of like a museal and art institutional context, and the debates were quite high. Also, as you can see here, the Berlin Biennial pushes radical chic to its limit, playing host to occupiers and terrorist leaders. And it's really interesting how actually it's discussed how could, just sorry, I have to go back. It's really interesting how, like in recent years, coming to new politics, how populist governments have been elected all over Europe, from France to Hungary to the Netherlands, and in the eye of this new political establishment, art and cultural institutions should exactly do that, propagate their messages in our institutions, and basically parallel their populist agenda in cultural politics as well, create a new nationalism, and also please more common local taste. And I think it's really, in that respect, it will be very curious what will be the reactions to the current Berlin Biennial that actually has been curated by an artist. Also, Tanya Bruguera will speak today, and she also has been part of the whole debate around this biennial. She has recently worked, and she will talk more about that, about her project Immigrant Movement. So I think it's, to me, very interesting also the shift that artists have taken in order basically to leave institutions. And I think we experienced that yet again, like in the 70s, but also now going against the saturation, like which was just mentioned also, of globalization of the art scene, and also being kind of a global player and being invited all over the world. But what does that really mean, and what does this mean to our practices? And of course, as heads of institutes, we support the call to reach out more globally. And of course, with Documenta, we have been part to that, and we also want to address different audiences. We want to be inclusive. But the question, why should that be interesting to us, does not always matches what local politicians have in mind when they ask us to do so. And it's also not just about geographical exclusions. It increasingly also goes back to class. And although today's divide is rather between those who have work and those who have not. And I think it's also in that respect very interesting to see artists joining movements, not only in the Arab Spring, but also in the Occupy movement. And we really face a very different kind of like geopolitical landscape in terms of that. And Stuart Hall's triangle of sex, race, and class, I think, plays again a very interesting role in like finding our kind of constellation within that setting. Also, Curating for New Politics public movement is part of this Berlin Biennial, and I also, maybe Eyal Dion will speak a little bit about that, because also he commissioned them for a project in Tel Aviv. And if it comes to neoliberal political agendas, curating art from all over the globe fits pretty well into that bill up to a certain degree, and doing Documenta, where we try to open up the territories to much more inclusive kind of notion. We also have experienced in the meantime also the incorporation and the backlash that could create. Being a global player, being globally active, often also means disconnect with the local. activity, and also it means to a certain extent also to depoliticize one's own action. Yeah, curating new politics, and as Stephen Foster pointed out, as an outline for this conference, there is an ever more visible politics of resistance also amongst cultural producers and the artistic community, which seems at this moment split between the 99% and the ones who associate with a more exclusive circle. To me, it was very inspiring to see Okwe Envesor's project, The Short Century, and this concept was kind of also a point of departure for the platforms that we started with Documenta, to understand the questions that comes across if you deal with this kind of a global cultural setting. And that is, of course, not the same depending where you go. As we heard before, the modes of production, the question of dissemination, even the freedom of speech is not the same at any part of this globe. And how is this reflected when you bring everything that you discover in a kind of a global research, when you try to bring everything back to kind of like to a location like Kasselmarkt for us, and showing that kind of artwork? Can it be read in a proper way? Will it not produce more misunderstandings than unfoldings? And so in that respect, to me, it was interesting, before we started to work, to engage in Okwe's The Short Century. And also these questions that we later picked up, addressing what does it mean, democracy unrealized in terms of civil societies, the nation state, transitional justice, processes of truth and reconciliation, creality, creolization, and the stage of siege in African cities, and the notion of post-colonialism has been very critical. And also Okwe in his show pretty much intertwined artifacts that relate to a certain political constellation in the different places, related and linked to the African independent movements, and between 1990, between the end of the Second World War and then recent years. And to me it was really interesting also to see that popular culture, footage of mass media and artifacts has been intertwined to unfold such a kind of a fabric that is not so easy to understand. And I'm really quite pleased and honored to speak here in the Jerusalem Museum, where also there's no division of arts and crafts, historical artifacts, and also contemporary art. And I think it's really important to understand the much more complex fabric if we talk about culture of a place. Yeah, with Documenta coming to the 5 platforms, to us it was really critical to have Documenta started 18 months before its inauguration of the 5th platform in Kassel. And of course that pointed a big challenge to the administration and the team of Documenta on site, and having this enterprise before. And of course there was also a debate that this is kind of a seminar for the curators, and actually it was. And to respect, also to respect this kind of specificities of a discourse that belong to a certain place, that belong to an intellectual community on a site, is really critical in respecting also discursive fields. And to go to those localities and discussing it with the communities on site was for us the respect that we also wanted to give to those communities before we kind of brought the artistic practices and the cultural debates to Kassel, to a much wider audience. All of those discussions are still online, the talks are still online. That was important for us. And we also produced about all of those platforms. What was also very interesting is there was a debate that, for example, I mean, here you see the 4th platform that took place in Nigeria, in Lagos, in Okwe's native country, with the support of the Goethe Institute. And a number of the critics have said this is very exclusive, who can go there, who can see it, but nobody asked in return who from these localities could come to Kassel and see the show, because most of the people in African countries wouldn't even get a visa to come to see the show. So we all also still argue from a position of the privileged, and I think it's really critical sometimes to say you have to go somewhere else with a debate because the people simply cannot come to you. And our passports might open many doors, but other passports don't. And I think this is also, if we talk about globalization, it's not that global at the end of the day. Maybe it's for goods, but simply not for people. And so to bring those at the end of the day back to Kassel, it was important to have this 18 months on preparation, also of like really deeper engage in the discourses that we then try to unfold in Kassel. After that, I was working on 2 years on a project. I was invited by Carlos Osvaldo Sanchez for curating a section for Insight, and I was working on a Transborder mobile archive with a number of people, and actually also over the course of 2 years. And this project basically tried to do collecting material of certain different archives and basically indicated to the different localities, again, what they not necessarily could see. What has been collected on the American side has not been accessible to everybody on the Mexican side of the border. And our project, I understood much more as an appendix to the existing art project, which invited about 35 artists or artist movements to develop projects also over the course of 2 years on both sides of the border. And of course not the American audience or the international audience could see the work on the Mexican border, but everybody on the Mexican side could access the projects on the Californian side of the border. So again, it was really critical to basically deal with this landscape and this complex topography. So we had 13 stops for the archive, and also there was always an open day associated with the different archives, and also we discussed who has the authority about each archive, what are the conditions of each archive. And of course, the city of Tijuana, for example, didn't have even proper storage for all of its city archive. And while on the American side, the university, the UCSD, for example, has deep storage archives and it's very controlled, who has access, etc. There's a much bigger budget, and of course they buy also a lot on the Mexican side into their archive, which is then no more accessible for the Mexicans. So it's really also to understanding who museums are archives, who has access to build those collections, who have the resources, and which audiences can even see that, has been on the core like for that kind of project. And that also, of course, is critical to me in terms of having this understanding of creating the future and not the walls. What does it really mean, what we do, and what kind of artistic practice can we support, and can we also support a practice as institutions that maybe is outside, again, of our walls. And Create the Future, Not the Walls was actually the title of a contribution of the feminist art critic Laura Cottingham for Meta number 2 in relation to a new spirit in curating a conference we were hosting at the Künstlerhaus Stuttgart, a small artist-run space where I was working in those years, in 1992. And it was quite interesting, yet again, to refer to this kind of call of creating much more like what is on stake at this moment. And to come back to Bertolt Brecht, he said, like, it takes a lot of things to change the world: anger and tenacity, science and indignation, the quick initiative, the long reflection, the cold patience, and the infinite perseverance, the understanding of the particular case and the understanding of the ensemble. Only the lessons of reality can teach us to transform reality. So what I did in the last 7 years since I have been working at MIT, I really tried to bring this also into the classroom, but also go with the classroom outside in the field, and to connect to activities that are taking place in different geopolitical conditions and constellations. And one of the courses, for example, is Special Problems in Visual Arts, that are our side projects, the production of space, acting in the void, the vacuum, the in-between, in moments of crisis when people are destabilized, and what could be the role of culture in such a moment when things are falling apart, when they are no more in a fixed condition. And I actually think it's very critical to engage exactly in that moment, not only with humanitarian projects, don't leave it to the NGOs, but be there as organic intellectuals and also try to engage in such fabrics. And artists are actually very good, they have a very good seismographic antennas and a very strong sensibility that often goes way beyond what the political setting has in mind. And I think we should trust artists and also institutions much more to engage in such moments. And actually they do it in a very different way. I don't mean to substitute for NGOs' work, it's very important what they do, but I think there is also another form of translation in such a moment, and it's a kind of dialogue that is sometimes much more helpful and I think equally important than humanitarian and medical help, etc. And I also learned a lot by that from my colleagues at MIT, such as Krzysztof Wodiczko, who was running over 17 years the interrogative design workshop, engaging in conflict drama through design, and many of you might know his homeless vehicles that he developed, but also in recent years he was engaging in war veteran vehicles, working with war veterans out of the Iraq war and also like from the war in Afghanistan, and engaging not only in the soldiers but to engage also in communication with their families. We also collaborated with MIT Center for International Studies in developing websites and reaching out, and this website, for example, was established by my colleague who is the director of the Center for International Studies at MIT, John Thurman, and that is engaging in the human cost of the war in Iraq. That is not that much communicated in the United States, and of course that also caused some tensions within the institution, but it's also critical that we dare to buy the hand that feeds us and don't give up a kind of critical perspective no matter where we work and who is supporting us. And he said he really wanted to counter all of the information that is circulating and give a voice to the people that is usually not heard. And so there are constant bloggings and online contributions to this kind of a blog that through MIT has an incredible outreach. MIT's website has a daily number of hits of more than 1 million. And so also to use the symbolic capital that we have with institutions, also to protect other voices or to give them space is also rather critical. And as Stephen said, to engage in the digital, I think social media and access through dissemination is very critical. I mean, a website, everybody can create a website or can do a blog, but not everybody will reach those blogs. So to be a platform has been very critical. And I was always reflecting, what does this mean, these platforms? We started with Documenta. How can we continue such platforms? And for example, launching websites, hosting them on MIT's website is such a way of doing it. We are also running websites with each of our own lecture series. If I say, like, I still do a kind of a mini curating. I'm hosting a weekly lecture series at MIT that brings together artists, scientists, cultural producers, and other people, people from humanitarian organizations, discussing certain topics together, discussing them from their own point of departure. It doesn't mean that artists should become social workers. It doesn't mean they become doing fieldwork in that sense, but sometimes the artists bring a very different point of perspective to the scientists, to the people developing new technologies, people working in NGOs, and the other way around. So I think the challenges we face today are so much more complex. We can't fix them and we can't address them from one discipline alone. We need this kind of cross-disciplinary dialogues even to address and understanding the fabric. MIT's mandate is solving the problem, and we always said maybe we should first understand the problem before we can solve it. Another initiative I had been involved in the steering committee and also over the last few years until it got kind of like dried out, I have to say, is an initiative that was called Jerusalem 2050. it was addressing the notion, if at the moment the terrain is so tense, it's so timid, and the kind of conversations are kind of almost close to zero, maybe we can start and think about where it is in 50 years, and where could it be? Could we imagine a peaceful Jerusalem then? And also, can we address it from outside, not being in the local situation? And so we launched a competition, a global competition, having different kind of topics, like from sustainability, water resilience, culture, but also political settings, architectural contributions, and having a mixed jury that is also looking up also all the competition entries together. And also the committee was very mixed in its composition. It included Meron Ben-Venista, a former deputy mayor of Jerusalem, but also Salim Tamari, who is a Palestinian, running the Institute for Jerusalem Studies here in Jerusalem, but also Herzfeld, Jewish architect who's from the Netherlands. So it was the head of the Aga Khan architecture network in Istanbul. So already to have this discussion as a jury going through all of these entries, and so we selected 5 projects out of the more than 400 entries, and those 5 contributions have been hosted for a term at MIT for half a year to develop their proposal further, and then the plan was to bring it to Jerusalem and have a debate here on site. That actually didn't take place. The whole Jerusalem project took about 4 years. The funding came from Jewish alumni, Jeffrey Silverman of MIT Sloan Business School. He gave the funding for everything. He contributed for 4 years, and then the funding cut down. We had to look for other funding, which was very difficult and very sensitive. And basically also MIT's leadership wasn't too sad when the project ended. There was a lot of reflection from the outside, a lot of debate, a lot of critical debate, and a lot of very timid email responses to Diane Davis, who started the project. She's professor for urban studies and planning, then at MIT, now at Harvard. One of the projects that came out and that I had to supervise was Voices Beyond Wall, to engage and youth at risk and in the Palestinian territories, in the Gaza and the West Banks. And Nitin Sawhney, who was an MIT alum, which we didn't know, the entries were anonymous, where we wouldn't know who contributed. It only was revealed when we made our selection. He was years ago a PhD in the Media Lab, and he collaborated with a Palestinian and with an American contributor. There were 3 to develop the project, and he continued it basically. And what he did since years, he goes every summer to the Palestinian territories teaching media workshops, video workshops for Palestinian youth and kids to develop their own films and videos. In the beginning, of course, he said, like, very often they were very emotional. It would address the current situation. But the longer he worked with them, basically the kids and the youth opened up, and they told similar stories than you would have from youth all over the world. They forgot the conflict for some time. They would address love, family issues, really down to earth, and like then people outside would sometimes say, how could they basically go to this kind of like not addressing anymore what's on stake? But it's also very important to give space to the people. I mean, to really give space to forget for a certain time this condition, and just also to be children and to be young people and to be playful. And also in response, here you see, like, he worked also on neighborhood mappings in the old city of the Shufat camp to let the children develop their own maps and come up with an own idea of their terrain. And then in return, we got invited also by MIT's library to show a reimagining of Gaza through the vision of young people. And the library actually appreciated so much they let it up at MIT's main library, the Roche Visual Studies Library for Architecture, Urban Studies, and Visual Arts for half a year to engage in a deeper way into that. Another former student of MIT and now assistant professor in the School of Architecture and Planning, Asra Aksamia, she developed a nomadic mosque in 2005, and it's basically a female suit that allows for transformation of any secular space into a religious one, revealing the ephemeral nature of the mosque, which takes place during the performance of the religious ritual, and the body of the worshipper simultaneously wears and embodies the mosque. This is a site and a person-specific design, and which is crucial also for deconstructing the idea of Islam, Middle East, and or the West as homogeneous cultural entities. A project just as a nomadic mosque breaks down the imaginary geography of the Orient onto a single person who may be both a faithful Muslim and a modern businesswoman with a taste for funky fashion. Asra herself is a Muslima. And she also had been invited for a project here in Jerusalem, actually, that would address both communities. I mean, it would address the Jewish and the Arab community here. And the project that she developed for here was a frontier vest. And she also has ventured outside the Islamic context to include other religious or political concerns in projects such as a temple tag, which draw on the shared traditions between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, addressing their contested relationship. And the Frontier West actually addresses religious, territorial, and psychological barriers that she encountered during her visit and when she was working here in Jerusalem and in Ramallah. This wearable prototype lends itself for different purposes, both sacred and secular, pointing at the shared histories of belief, systems of Judaism and Islam. And the West actually can be transformed either into a talit, a Jewish prayer shawl, or into an Islamic prayer rug. It's informed by the Jewish historic practices, and it allows for these different expressions. It's kind of a wearable architecture that can be combined to generate a communal space, and it also addresses the needs of congregation in a very minimalistically way. And when Asra presented this project also when she was hired at MIT, again, it caused a very heated debate and between the different communities. Can she do that? Like, it looks almost like a suicide bomber jacket. And we had ongoing debates actually at MIT, which was a very good thing. And I want to enter that. Our program is called ACT, and that's actually what we should do. And thank you so much for listening.